I had just completed my third round of chemo when the email arrived an invitation to a meeting on the 19th floor. No subject line, no context, just a time and a place. And something in my gut told me this wasn't just another update. My name is Evelyn Moore, and I'm 58 years old. For nearly 17 years, I was the lead systems architect at Linatech Systems, a logistics tech firm based in Minneapolis. I helped build the routing infrastructure of their entire operation, relied on a system that kept their deliveries on time, their fuel costs down, and their reputation intact. I wasn't one for office politics. I didn't schmooze at happy hours or try to be anyone's favorite. I stayed late, documented every improvement like it was a living organism, and wrote code with the kind of care most people reserve for their own children. I believed that loyalty and results would speak for themselves. But loyalty doesn't shield you from politics, especially when new leadership shows up with buzzwords instead of respect. 3 weeks after I returned to work, my hair just beginning to grow back, Ethan Locke, our newly minted CEO and a former investor, brought in his son Liam to lead strategic innovation. Liam was the kind of young man who wore $1,000 sneakers to board meetings and referred to me as the legacy model, like I was some outdated printer. I tried to ignore it. I kept my head down and focused on stabilizing the latest version of the system, hoping they'd see the value in what I was still bringing to the table. But then came Amber, Liam's girlfriend, a recent hire with a background in organic cosmetics marketing, now rebranded as a logistics transformation consultant. Soon after she arrived, I noticed her name popping up in the internal file logs. She was accessing critical source code, my code. One evening, after finishing an update that allowed our system to autocorrect routes based on real-time weather feeds, I discovered she had downloaded my documentation without any clearance. I went to Dean, my manager, someone I'd shared late-night deployments with, someone I thought I could still trust. He just shrugged and said, "She's probably just trying to learn. It's harmless." But his eyes said something else. He knew exactly what was happening, and he wasn't going to stop it. Something in me shut down that day, not hope, but the illusion that hard work would protect me. And the next morning, when I walked into that sleek glass conference room on the 19th floor where no one met my gaze, where Ethan started rambling about youthful energy and reimagining legacy roles, I finally understood. I wasn't just being replaced. I was being erased. Not because I failed, but because I reminded them of what they were afraid to admit. That buzzwords and fresh faces can't replace wisdom, grit, and a lifetime of earned skill. But what they didn't know, what they never even thought to ask, was that I had already prepared for this. And what they thought was my ending was only the start of a story they'd soon have to hear from far below the position they tried to push me out of. Cancer doesn't just steal your strength, it steals your rhythm, your confidence, and, if you're not careful, your place in the world. During my treatment, I tried to hold on to something steady me work, my sense of purpose, the system I had spent years nurturing like a child. I logged in from home between infusions, tested new optimization modules when the steroids kept me awake at 3 a.m., and documented every revision with the same precision as before, even as my hands trembled from the side effects. I believed that showing Upheaven halfway meant I'd still be seen as valuable. I believed loyalty counted for something. But loyalty, I would learn, is only valuable when it's convenient for those in charge. After I returned to the office, thinner, grayer, and moving a little slower, the energy around me has shifted. People avoided eye contact in the break room. Meetings I once led were suddenly rescheduled or streamlined. Amber, who now floated through the halls with the confidence of someone who had never failed in anything that truly mattered, began requesting access to files she didn't understand, smiling sweetly while casually dismissing years of logic with phrases like legacy code and technical debt. One afternoon, I caught Liam in the hallway, talking to a junior engineer I had mentored for years. "She's a legend," he said, "but sometimes legends have to step aside for innovation." He laughed, like it was a clever quote, not a warning. And the young engineer, to his credit, didn't laugh, but he also didn't say anything. That Friday, I stayed late. Everyone else had gone home, but I needed to finish recalibrating our adaptive routing module before Monday's big freight partner demo. When I logged into the archive, I saw my private documentation, accessed at 7:43 p.m. by Amber's account. Exported, duplicated, no authorization, no explanation. I froze. Not because I was afraid, I was well beyond fear by that point, but because I understood what this meant. The house I had built was being scavenged piece by piece, and soon I would be shown the door like a tenant, overstaying her welcome. The following week, it happened. I walked into the executive conference room, where the window stretched to the skyline, but the air felt suffocating. Ethan stood at the head of the table, flanked by Liam and Amber, both exuding the smug confidence of people who believe they've already won. My manager, Dean, was there too, though he couldn't meet my eyes. The entire systems division leadership was present, as if this were a celebration rather than an execution. Ethan began with a smile, his voice smooth, rehearsed, filled with words like evolution, cultural shift, and future forward thinking. He didn't mention my name until it was time to say it was no longer needed. Your role, he said, has served us well, but we believe it's time to realign with a more agile, next-gen mindset. No offer for reassignment, no discussion, just elimination. Then Liam stepped forward, his voice practically dripping with insincerity. Amber will be overseeing the transition of our logistics platform. Her background in adaptive systems and strategic insight aligns perfectly with our future goals. I nearly laughed. Amber, who once asked me what an API endpoint was, would be overseeing a platform that took me 5 years to stabilize. She smiled, nodded as if receiving a coronation, and added, Evelyn built a strong base. Now it's time to evolve. Dean slid an envelope across the table. Inside, severance papers, a vague note about future collaboration, and a legal reminder about intellectual property that felt less like policy and more like a warning. But the moment that cut deepest came after. As I stood, calm but gutted, Liam leaned toward Amber and whispered something. She laughed, light and hollow. I will never know what he said, but I knew exactly what he meant. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't scream, because I knew something they didn't. Everything Amber had accessed had been tracked. Every file she touched had embedded digital markers. Every piece of Orion's source code the system they were about to hollow out had been backed up, versioned, watermarked, and encrypted in my personal archive, legally and carefully documented on my own time, on my own equipment. And quietly, during those long nights and empty weekends, I had begun work on something else. Something leaner, smarter, unbreakable. They thought they were cutting away dead weight. What they didn't realize was they had just amputated their lifeline. And while they toasted to their bold new future, I went home, made myself a cup of weak tea, and opened the project folder that would soon carry not only my name but my redemption. The days that followed my dismissal moved slowly, like a fog rolling through familiar streets that no longer felt like home. I didn't cry that night, not because I wasn't shattered, but because something deeper than sadness had taken hold. It wasn't despair, it was clarity. The kind that comes not with rage, but with quiet recognition. They hadn't just taken my job, they had taken my name off of something I built with every ounce of who I was. That weekend, while the world around me went on as if nothing had changed, I logged into the secure archive I had created months, early era folder labeled Orion, Backbone, Encrypted, redundantly backed up, and invisibly watermarked with my digital signature on every core file. I had started building it when I first sensed the shift in the office, when Liam's presence became more performance than purpose, and Amber's questions revealed a dangerous blend of ambition and ignorance. I had told myself then it was just for peace of mind, but now I understood. I hadn't been paranoid. I had been preparing. Each file I reviewed felt like a page from a personal diary lines of code I'd written late at night with a heating pad pressed against my back, flowcharts drawn during chemo sessions when the only light in the hospital room was the glow of my laptop. Orion hadn't been a project. It had been survival, a tether to meaning in a body that was fighting to betray me. And so, in the quiet of my living room, surrounded by the stillness that follows betrayal, I began sketching the outlines of something new. I called it Ether, where Orion had been built inside the constraints of a corporate structure layered with protocols, permissions, and compromises. Ether would be different. It would learn and adapt without waiting for human approval. It would correct before failure. It would interpret not just data, but the intentions behind the variables. I didn't know then if anyone would ever use it. I just knew I had to build it. Each night, I coded until my eyes ached. I studied transportation bottlenecks in northern states, weather anomalies in freight hubs like St. Louis and Pittsburgh, driver fatigue statistics from union-released white papers data most executives would call too granular, but which I knew told the real story of system failure. I wrote predictive models that could simulate rerouting decisions not just based on logic, but on lived human variables, weather-induced detours, overnight delays, mid-route cancellations. By day, I walked the slow aisles of the co-op market, trying to look normal. By night, I built algorithms that would soon embarrass every executive who had treated me like a relic. I didn't speak to many people during those first few weeks, but word traveled. A recruiter I had once met at a tech conference years ago reached out with a vague but promising invitation. Dinner with someone who values engineers who've walked through fire. I accepted, more out of curiosity than hope, and that's where I met Maya Lin, founder of a lean but ambitious logistics startup called ClearPath Nexus. She didn't talk about titles or press releases. She asked one question: what would you build if no one told you what you couldn't? That night, I showed her the first prototype of Aether, stripped down, running on my old laptop. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. The screen populated route adjustments in real time, responding to synthetic disruption scenarios within milliseconds. Maya watched for 5 minutes in silence. Then she said, "We're not here to preserve the old world. We're here to replace it. Build this and I'll give you the team." 2 days later, I was sitting in a converted warehouse in Des Moines, surrounded by whiteboards, spare monitors, and the kind of raw, unapologetic energy I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't chief anything. I wasn't a relic. I was a builder again. Meanwhile, whispers began reaching me from Linatech. Amber had started refining Orion, deleting what she called unnecessary submodules to simplify the backend. One junior developer, who had once asked me how to structure recursive functions, told me quietly over LinkedIn that she had removed the real-time ETA logic because it used too many nested functions. And just like that, the heart of the system began to fail. Clients started noticing inconsistencies, freight routed in loops, time estimates off by hours, dashboards freezing mid-load. But instead of reverting changes, Liam doubled down. He framed the growing chaos as a period of recalibration. Amber called the issues growing pains. But underneath their spin, the cracks were spreading fast. I heard it all through backchannels engineers who had been loyal to me, now stuck patching holes they didn't understand, working late under pressure without the documentation I had removed for safety. One anonymous message simply read, "They deleted your pulse tracker. The system doesn't know how to breathe anymore." I read that line twice, not because I didn't understand it, but because it landed harder than I expected. They had taken something functional, elegant, resilient, and they had butchered it for vanity. But I wasn't interested in watching them drown. I was already halfway across the bridge I had built in silence. It didn't take long for the cracks at Linatech Systems to show, although for a while they tried to patch them over with corporate buzzwords and empty confidence. On the surface, they kept insisting everything was under review, transitional, and progress-oriented, but inside the walls of that once efficient machine, chaos had already taken root, and those who remained could feel it with every failed update, every missed deadline, and every quiet glance that said, "This is not working." I wasn't watching obsessively, but the updates came nonetheless through late-night emails, encrypted messages, and the cautious whispers of engineers who were still hanging on, not out of loyalty, but out of inertia. One message from a junior developer I had trained read simply, "They replaced your regional recalibration module with a simplified logic tree. The system is sending freight in circles literally." Another described a delivery from Fargo to Wichita that took an extra 200 miles because Amber had removed what she called obsolete logic clutter, not realizing that those cluttered scripts had been dynamically adjusting fuel-efficient reroutes based on live regional traffic data, something I had spent months refining using real-world congestion models and data no one else on that team even knew existed. Still, instead of admitting fault, Liam went into full performance mode. He began publishing internal memos framing the failures as learning curves and growing pains, holding emergency stand-ups where Amber barked vague directives like, "Just roll back to a cleaner version," despite the fact that version control had become nearly impossible after her undocumented changes began overriding essential submodules. I heard that during one particularly disastrous week, the client dashboard crashed 3 times in a single day, forcing the support team to manually respond to hundreds of freight status inquiries while Amber insisted the delays were the result of system hiccups. But the clients weren't buying it. One, a Midwestern freight partner called Southline Logistics, reportedly sent a furious letter to Ethan demanding answers after discovering their shipment had been rerouted in a loop between two cities for nearly 2 hours. The culprit, as I later confirmed through a former colleague, was a deleted logic modulione that had previously handled ETA adjustments based on weather events. Amber had flagged it as non-essential, unaware that it was one of Orion's most delicate predictive assets. And while they stumbled through their self-inflicted minefield, I kept building. At ClearPath Nexus, I worked quietly with my new team 4 engineers and 2 data scientists who didn't ask for titles or credit, just clarity of purpose. Maya, true to her word, stayed out of our way, offering support without steering the ship. We moved fast, but deliberately, testing every component of Aether in control simulations before releasing even a single live feature. Within weeks, Aether was outperforming the legacy Orion framework in almost every category: route efficiency, predictive adjustments, and system uptime. But we didn't chase headlines or brag about benchmarks. We let the product speak. One private demo at a logistics roundtable in Indianapolis changed everything. Executives watched as Aether rerouted a multi-city freight path in real time. In response to a simulated flood warning, then optimized fuel consumption to avoid truck idle time. There were no dramatic slides, just execution. Meanwhile, back at Linatech, desperation was quietly taking hold. More messages reached me. One from a senior QA analyst said, "She tried to restore a previous build, but half the dependencies were gone. It's like she deleted the ladder and now wonders why she can't climb." Another, more chilling message read, "They finally notice you're gone, but only because everything is starting to break." Still, they refused to say my name. Not publicly, not internally. It was as if acknowledging my absence would confirm their failure. But the silence was louder than any admission. One day, I received a note from Sabrina, a former lead developer who had quietly endured Liam's posturing and Amber's incompetence for months. Her message was direct. "I'm done. If you're building something real, I want in." I didn't need to ask why. She had always seen the value in stability, and now, more than ever, she knew what it looked like when stability was ripped away. She wasn't the only one. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 more engineers reached out, some I had mentored. Others I had barely worked with, but all carried the same quiet frustration, the same flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a place where experience was valued, where knowledge wasn't seen as a relic, and where people didn't have to defend their worth simply for being around too long. I took their names, I asked questions, and I listened. I didn't promise anything yet, because what I was building wasn't just a response, it was a future, and it had to be worthy of their risk. Still, the messages kept coming. One, from a temp contractor inside the support team, said that Ethan had finally authorized a full audit of Orion after a second major enterprise client pulled out of a pending contract. According to him, Amber tried to play it off as unexpected scalability issues, but internal reports showed systemic failures, not edge case bugs. And while they scrambled to contain the fallout, a quiet shift began happening in the industry. On a mid-tier freight tech forum, someone posted anonymously about a mysterious new system that handled live disruptions better than anything they'd ever seen. Then came a side-by-side breakdown article on LinkedIn comparing Orion's static UI with a sleek, fast-reacting interface powered by something called Aether. The comparison wasn't subtle, it was a statement. And though we hadn't even launched publicly, the word was out. Clients started calling. One of them, East Grove Freight, a name I hadn't heard in years, booked a meeting with us under a different name, just to see if what they'd heard was true. When we showed them the live demo, complete with fatigue response analytics and storm prediction reroutes, their lead operations director leaned back and simply said, "Why didn't we get this the first time?" They never mentioned Linatech, they didn't have to. And as they left, I realized something. Not only was the house I'd built burning down without me, but a better one had already begun to rise, brick by brick, in its place. By the time whispers of Aether began circulating through the industry, I had already let go of the need for validation from the people who once dismissed me. I didn't set out to win anything back, not titles, not respect, not some symbolic redemption, but what I built with my new team at ClearPath Nexus began doing exactly that. Not because we asked for recognition, but because the product we delivered made it impossible to ignore us. Our simulations were no longer theoretical. Aether was now running live in controlled environments, and what we saw wasn't just improvement, it was evolution. We weren't merely patching what Orion used to do, we were redefining what intelligent freight routing could be. The system could anticipate port congestion based on weather and container delay data, factor in driver fatigue using anonymized biometric trends, and reassign live loads in under 30 seconds without human input. But we didn't announce it with press releases or flashy banners. We invited key clients to see it work, and that was enough. One afternoon, we ran a demo for East Grove Freight, the same company that had once partnered with Linatech for a multi-million-dollar coast-to-coast integration. They came into the room cautious, their body language guarded, their expectations low-burned too many times by over-promising executives and underperforming systems. But the moment Aether processed a reroute mid-simulation due to a sudden lane closure in Illinois and optimized the delivery schedule in under 4 seconds, something shifted in their posture. Their lead systems architect leaned forward and whispered, This is what we expected 2 years ago." They didn't mention Amber, or Liam, or Linatech, but they didn't need to. 2 days later, East Grove formally requested contract terms, and with that, the first domino fell. What followed was not a sudden wave, but a steady, undeniable tide. Companies that had quietly endured Linatech's failure began seeking alternatives. Executives who once ignored my name in meetings were now emailing Maya, requesting discreet introductions. Even former competitors began showing up at trade expos, asking to see what Aether could do in real time. We gave them just enough to understand what was possible and not a drop more, because this wasn't about showing off. It was about changing the standard. And then something unexpected happened. Sabrina, now officially on our team, walked into our open floor workspace one morning with a grainy screenshot printed on a piece of paper. It was a Slack message one Amber had sent months earlier when she first took over Orion. It read, "We'll clean this up. Evelyn's code is old. The system just needs fresh eyes." That same day, a second screenshot circulated among engineers at a client firm. Amber again, joking that legacy systems are like legacy engineers, sluggish and outdated. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because while she mocked what I had built, we had already launched the second internal build of Aether faster. Leaner, smarter, a version capable of modeling entire regional supply chains using real-time API integrations with customs checkpoints, rail schedules, and fuel pricing projections. And our clients didn't just notice, they leaned in. During one pitch, a VP of operations from Freight West, another former Linatech partner, interrupted our walkthrough and asked, "Are you the same Evelyn Moore from the Orion framework?" I paused only for a second before replying, "I'm the one they replaced. This is what I built after." He nodded and said, "That explains the difference." That week, Northern Hall, a logistics giant from the Pacific Northwest, sent over a letter of intent. With them came more credibility, more exposure, and yes, more pressure. But our team didn't slow down. If anything, the momentum became our fuel. Every new deployment, every passing test, every quiet win reminded me why I had fought so hard to keep building, even when my body was exhausted and my name had been stripped from the thing I gave life to. Meanwhile, Linatech was unraveling faster than anyone had anticipated. Engineers were quitting mid-cycle, customer support couldn't keep up with inbound complaints. Amber had reportedly tried to rebuild key Orion components by contracting an external firm, but the third-party tools clashed with the remaining legacy code, creating a domino effect of system-wide instability. One particularly damaging incident occurred during a live demo with Summit Rail Logistics, where the platform failed to calculate accurate freight rates, showed double fuel estimates, and locked up entirely mid-presentation. The client walked out, and that same afternoon, someone from inside Linatech sent Maya and me a messaging official internal memo titled "Urgent Proposal, Potential Strategic Collaboration." It came from Jordan R., a name I hadn't seen in months. He had once been my manager, the same man who couldn't meet my eyes the day I was let go. Attached to his message was a draft agreement. Linatech was offering a licensing deal for Aether. 8 figures. Complete system access. And buried in the legal boilerplate was one line that made me stop reading. We request a formal and confidential meeting to explore restoration of trust and leadership alignment under Miss Moore's oversight. I turned the page, passed it to Maya, and said only, "They want me back." She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just nodded slowly and asked, "What do you want to do?" I stared out the window for a long moment before answering. "I want them to put it in writing, that I built this, that they removed me, that what they called outdated is now the only thing holding their future together." 2 days after we received the proposal from Lynatech Systems, silence lingered like smoke after a controlled fire, thick, acrid, and telling. Then, without warning, a follow-up message arrived. This time, it came not from Jordan, but from Lynatech's legal team. A request for an in-person meeting, neutral location, confidential, executive representation. That was all it said, but it said enough. Maya and I reviewed the documents together. The numbers were high figures, multi-year licensing rights to Aether, and a proposed partnership clause that included phrases like restorative innovation and reputation rebuild. But tucked into the offer, right where most people would skim over boilerplate, was a single sentence they didn't expect us to pause on. Attribution to be determined in post-signature marketing material. In other words, they were willing to pay for the code, but not for the truth. I pushed the paper across the table and said quietly, "No deal not unless my name is part of the agreement. Not just as a developer, but as the architect. And not behind the curtain in print, in public, on record." Maya didn't hesitate. She called our legal team, and within the hour, they had drafted a counteroffer that was precise, assertive, and non-negotiable. The licensing terms remained, but a new clause was added on that would require Lynatech to issue a formal, public statement, acknowledging me as the original creator of both Orion and Aether, and explicitly stating that I had been wrongfully removed from my position under the guise of organizational restructuring. We sent the document that evening. The next 48 hours were met with nothing but digital silence. But silence, I'd come to understand, often means they're calculating how much it will cost to resist. Then, on a gray Friday morning, Maya and I stepped into a leased office suite in Chicago, the kind of space that reeked of last-minute crisis management. Across the table sat Jordan, looking smaller than I remembered, his suit too stiff, his eyes too tired. Beside him was Lynatech's general counsel and a corporate mediator whose job, I assume, was to smile through tension. The discussion began with pleasantries that landed flat. When they tried to negotiate the wording of the public statement, offering alternative phrases like key contributor or critical figure in development, our legal rep didn't flinch. She simply closed the folder and said, "We're not here to dilute history. You can license the system, or you can keep bleeding clients while pretending your version still works." The room went still. Then Jordan finally spoke. "We should have done this differently." He didn't look at me when he said it, and maybe that was for the best. I wasn't there for apologies. I was there for clarity. They caved by the end of the meeting. The final version of the agreement, signed and sealed, read exactly as it should have from the beginning. Lynatech Systems formally acknowledges Evelyn Moore as the sole and original architect of the Orion routing infrastructure and the Aether predictive logistics system, developed independently following her removal from the company without just cause. I signed it without ceremony, handed the pen back to the mediator, and walked out. That night, I sat on my apartment balcony, wrapped in an old cardigan that still smelled faintly of hospital disinfectant from my chemo days, and opened the email containing the official press release. There, in the headline, was my name, not hidden in a footnote or buried in a back-end server, but up front, acknowledged, attributed, respected. The article made its rounds faster than I expected. Industry blogs picked it up within hours. One headline read, "From cast aside to industry standard, the woman who built the future." Another was less subtle. Lynatech pays the price for legacy bias. But what surprised me most wasn't the headlines. It was the response. My inbox overflowed, former clients reaching out to congratulate me, engineers I'd never met sharing their own stories of being overlooked or replaced, and even recruiters who once ignored my resume asking if I'd consider a board seat or keynote panel. And yet, None of it compared to one particular message. It was short, just 2 lines. We should have seen your value. Let's fix that. It was signed by Carla Jensen, former VP of Operations at Western Rail Partners, a company I had once pitched to years ago, back when Orion was new and I was still seen as too technical to lead. Attached to her message was a proposal, a strategic alliance between ClearPath Nexus and Western Rail, with a full rollout of Aether across their distribution networks. This wasn't just a partnership. It was a seismic shift. And as Maya and I read through the terms, both of us understood the deeper significance. This wasn't about revenge. It was about realignment, not just of power, but of purpose. Because for every person like me someone overlooked, underestimated, quietly replaced, there were dozens more still waiting for the world to notice what they had built in silence. And now, finally, the world was listening. 6 months after Linatech's public admission and the rollout of our first national contract, I found myself standing behind a glowing red TEDx sign, waiting for the cue to step onto the stage. The auditorium wasn't grand, but it was full engineers, professionals, students, executives, and more than a few gray heads with eyes that looked like they'd seen the same battles I had. The talk was titled, "They Replaced Me. I Rebuilt the System." And as I stepped into the light, I didn't feel nerves. I felt peace. I spoke not as someone who had won a fight, but as someone who had survived one. I shared how a company had chosen image over substance, how a woman recovering from cancer, fighting fatigue and fear, had quietly written the very code they would later pay millions to use. I talked about resiliency, not the motivational poster kind, but the kind that takes root when you're alone in a hospital room with a laptop and a system that no one believes in but you. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. What mattered wasn't who failed me, but what I chose to do after. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't loud or cruel. It's building something so undeniable that even those who try to erase you are forced to reckon with your return. The video of that talk went viral not because it was flashy or dramatic, but because it was real. In the days that followed, my inbox flooded again, not with praise, but with confessions. Engineers who had been replaced by someone younger, professionals passed over because they didn't fit the new culture, women who had trained their replacements and were then told they were no longer aligned with the brand. They wrote to say thank you, to say they saw themselves in my story, to say they had almost given up until now. But it wasn't just messages that came, it was people. A week after the TEDx event, Emma Kwan, a brilliant software architect who had worked under Jordan years ago and left in frustration, walked through the doors of ClearPath Nexus with a weathered leather portfolio and a quiet smile. "Your talk hit harder than I expected," she said softly. "I want to be somewhere that builds people, not just systems." I didn't hesitate. I hired her on the spot. That same day, we pushed Aether 2 into final stage testing. It included a predictive failure module I had designed years earlier but held back, waiting for the right environment. The module could detect system degradation patterns before they happened, giving logistics partners a 35% boost in efficiency and preventing disasters before they ever touched the surface. It wasn't just software anymore. It was anticipation. It was protection. It was breath in the lungs of a living network. Meanwhile, Linatech had become a shadow of itself. The once glossy name, paraded across keynote slides and investor decks, now carried the quiet shame of betrayal and collapse. Their social feeds went silent. Their tech panel stopped inviting them. Their clients, one by one, moved on, many of them to us. But I never gloated. Not publicly, not even privately. Because this wasn't about dragging them down. It was about rising beyond their reach. To mark the launch of Aether 2, we held a small celebration in our open plan office. No fanfare, no press, just coffee, donuts, and the kind of laughter that only comes when the weight you've carried finally lifts from your chest. I looked around at my team, some new, some rescued from the wreckage, and saw not just talent, but restoration. A few days later, I launched something deeply personal, the Aether Fund, a program dedicated to supporting mid-career technologists, especially women, veterans, and those who had been quietly replaced, pushed aside, or told they no longer fit. The fund didn't just offer jobs. It offered mentorship, reskilling, confidence building, and dignity. The very things I had to rebuild for myself, one silent night at a time. One of our first applicants was Marisol, a systems analyst who had once trained Amber in basic architecture fundamentals without ever receiving credit. She told me, "I used to believe invisibility was the price of experience. Your story changed that." Today, she's leading a product stream in Aether 2's interface evolution team. As for me, I no longer walk into rooms wondering if I belong. I walk in knowing I've built something that speaks for itself. The company that once fired me now pays licensing fees to use the system I built without them. And with that money, I invest not just in better software, but in better people. Because the best revenge isn't making someone pay. It's making someone wish they had seen your value before it was too late. And this is just the beginning. If you've ever felt cast aside, replaced, or silenced, remember this. Your worth isn't gone. It's just waiting to be rebuilt, stronger than before. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories of justice, redemption, and quiet strength. You are not alone, and your story isn't over yet.